the night, I hear him talk, the coldest story ever told. Somewhere far along this road, he lost his soul to a woman so heartless. How could you be so heartless? Oh, how could you be so heartless? How could you be so cold as the winter wind when it breeze, yo? Just remember that you talking to me, though. You need to watch the way you talking to me, yo. I mean, after all the things that we've been through. I mean, after all the things we...
What is going on, everybody? This is King Rickie Rozay here, General Manager of Wrestle Addict Radio and host of the Kings of the Rings podcast. And welcome all you Patreon members, especially Kavita, Wade, Slack, Fretch, and all the other people there. Oh, and the Vaz family, of course. Can't forget the Vaz family because they're freaking awesome. Welcome all of you Patreon members and anybody I forget. I'm sorry, I'm just going off the top of my head here, but welcome you guys to another exclusive episode of Watch the Throne, where I, your host, King Rickie Rozay, breaks down a particular event or happening in wrestling and really digs deep into it in pretty much the only way I know how. And also shout out to Jermaine, our Patreon member from across seas. What's up, Jermaine? I did not forget about you at all, Jermaine. My apologies for that. Anywho, this episode is going to be controversial. It's going to be divisive, and quite frankly, you might not like me after this, if you even like me in the first place to begin with. But that's okay, because that's your personal problem and not mine. What I'm digging into, obviously, is the Dark Side of the Ring season finale, which documented, in some way, shape, or form, the death of Owen Hart and the last days of Owen and everything. So, very good documentary. Dark Side of the Ring usually does a lot of very poignant documentaries, a lot of interesting documentaries. And this last season was very, very loaded, especially starting out with Chris Benoit and then all the other stories, the Road Warriors, the UWF, Jimmy Snuka, girlfriend murder or death, whatever you want to call that. And they ended with the Owen Hart tragedy. As you guys already probably know, Owen Hart was performing a special in-ring entrance where he was going to come down from the rafters on end of the vice, actually, that was holding his body, released, and Owen fell a considerably long distance onto one of the end posts, and which he pretty much he died suffering very serious internal injuries. And that's kind of where the Dark Side of the Ring kind of talks about and everything leading up to it. So you learn a lot about Owen Hart in this entire thing. You learn that Owen is pretty much the youngest of 12 Hart members. That's a freaking farm family right there. That all the Hart males went into wrestling, and then the Hart women married wrestlers. So you have, a giant lineage of other affiliates and cousins and people who married into the family. Davey Boy Smith kind of being one of them, and one of the bigger examples of how massive the Hart family is and how they pretty much became royalty. So Owen gets into wrestling. He is a natural from the jump because he's learned from all of his other siblings how to wrestle. It's kind of interesting. Sorry about that, Zordon, and people are kidding me up. I'm popular, it's very interesting, kind of being the king. Anywho, Owen's very dynamic for the 80s, very good person. He actually broke into WWE as the Blue Blazer. Then when they switched him up, he became Owen Hart, and he became Owen Hart. He had this classic match with his brother Brett at WrestleMania 10, one of the greatest technical matches that you can ever see. And then the Attitude Era really kicks into full gear. And according to the documentary, Owen was having difficulty kind of getting over because Owen was pretty much a straight wrestler. And from what the documentary said, he had a difficult time displaying his personality, which is very interesting. And one of my bigger points is that I remember Owen being very charismatic and very just funny in the ring, and maybe that's something he didn't want to do. They always mention that Owen was a straight shooter, that he was always combative not combative, but always very verbal with creative about things that he did want to do and that he didn't want to do. So much that he did not disgrace his family. I don't know where the blue blazer comes in to that, but it is what it is. So Owen's having this difficult time, I guess, getting over per se, and still kind of being that top guy, which for all intents and purposes, he was being a top guy, but he was having a hard time developing his entertainment character side, which again is just weird because outside of the ring, there's always stories about him always pulling jokes and being funny and having this, personality, but apparently he couldn't do it in the ring, which is very interesting to me, to say the least. Be it as it may. In order to assist him, they bring back the Blue Blazer. It's kind of a little bit of a comedy gimmick, but it's something to really help him maybe develop an in-ring persona that is catchy to the audience at the time. This is Attitude Era, so things are a little bit different during this era, to say the least. So he's in the middle of his Blue Blazer gimmick, and as sometimes as part of Blue Blazer, he had done at least once before, and maybe even multiple times before the tragic incident, he would be attached to what's known as, I believe, a carabiner, and like a cord, and he would descend from the Raptors. He did it at least once, and it was kind of a joke thing. People alleged that it was messing with Sting. I don't actually believe that wholeheartedly. It was just a wrinkle in his character, and it was something different, and also something to probably make him stand out. WWE doesn't always do Raptor stunts. It didn't do it that much in the past. The only really iconic one that was done was Shawn Michaels descending into WrestleMania right before the Iron Man match with Bret Hart. So that's one of the classic one that you see forever and ever in all of their footage. Be that as it may, this was a Blue Blazer thing that they were doing right now, and it was an interesting gimmick. So pay-per-view comes out. They're in Kansas City, and according to the documentary, so everything that we're talking about here, but let me premise before I keep going, everything that we're talking about here is based on the Dark Side of the Ring documentary. It's not based on any of these other shoot interviews that happened. It's not based on anything else, or any words or comments that anybody said on any podcast, anything like that. I'm going strictly based on what was documented in the Dark Side of the Ring. So they do this. We're in Kansas City for his pay-per-view. Owen Hart, dressed as the Blue Blazer, is supposed to be wrestling the Godfather that night in a match. And he's going to do his entrance where he's going to be cooked to a carabiner. He's going to descend from the Raptors. Again, something he's done before. Now, according to his wife, and especially his wife, they changed the style of carabiner that Owen was going to use that night. And when it was time to practice, because wrestlers always practice their entrances and the stunts, it's kind of like a dress rehearsal before a big event, if for that kind of purpose. They do dress rehearsals. That's pretty much what it is. You dress rehearsal before the show. And when Owen was, and according to when Owen was supposed to practice this, Owen was reluctant to do so, saying, no, I got it. And he was told that you should really practice this. This is a different setup than from before. That's all that's said about it. So we don't know if he actually did practice it or if he would actually still refuse and they never practiced it whatsoever. This becomes a big point of mine when we get there. So he doesn't practice it. Multiple people, according to the Dark Side of the Ring documentary, said that Owen was off that day and wasn't his regular self, which could have been a bunch of things. Before leaving for the airport for his family, Owen did say, take care of your sister and mother for me, to his son, which is very interesting nonetheless. And his son was really kind of weird about that. So the show begins. Owen's thing is happening. We're doing like a Blue Blazer, I guess, video package while he's trying to descend, and the carabiner unhooks. Owen plummets over 80 feet, hits directly on the ring post. He is also visibly bleeding. I don't know if he actually impaled himself or he was coughing on blood. I don't know where the blood comes from, but there was blood on the ring apron, and they get paramedics and hospital people, and they strap him in. They bring him to a hospital. They sent him back to revive him, and unfortunately, he's unable to be revived, and Owen Hart dies. Vince McMahon immediately, when he figured out what happened, and Owen fell, calls Owen's wife, tells her that there's something, that Owen had a fall, and that a doctor will be contacting her about the update. Because I don't know if Vince actually went to the hospital with Owen. It sounds like he didn't, but he did have the linkage to a doctor and his and her and Owen's wife, and made that connection. Nonetheless, Owen passes away. The show continues on after Owen is stretchered out. The show continues on and finishes. Owen, the news breaks on air versus during pay-per-view era of WWE. News breaks on pay-per-view that Owen had passed away. None of the footage shown during that pay-per-view showed Owen falling. There is apparently, I guess, B-roll footage. That means footage that isn't used on TV or any documentary that does have the video of him falling, but we do not see that. We do not have access to that. To my knowledge, it is pretty much, locked inside of a very, very secret place of WWE property, wherever that may be, never to be seen by anybody, and that's okay. Okay, Owen Hart dies. The news, really hits mainstream. The day after, they have a funeral about a week after the event. Pretty much all of WWE attends, on top of, everybody from his native country of Canada and his hometown, where there is a very big thing. The wife, who is upset, obviously, that her husband died in a tragic accident, vows to seek vengeance and get revenge for the people that did this, according to her. And so she goes on an investigation and she tries to figure out what's going on. And based on the evidence that she thinks she has, she files a wrongful death, I guess, lawsuit against Vince McMahon and the WWE. And according to her statement, she wanted this entire thing to go to trial. She never wanted a settlement, and yet she takes a settlement of $18 million, uses some of that money, if not all of it, I'm not sure, to create the Owen Hart Foundation. And the foundation helps, I believe, not underprivileged, but people who are less fortunate in some way, shape, or form, and assist them throughout, I believe, just the country of Canada. I do not know if it's a worldwide foundation. I would have to do some more research on that. And that's pretty much it. And they go into a little bit of discussions about should the show have gone on, and also should Owen Hart be in the Hall of Fame. And that's pretty much the show. And based on all the stuff that was in the show, I will tell you this, and this is probably where it's going to get a little bit difficult for you guys to listen to. Based on what was shown in that documentary, I find no clear evidence of any wrongdoing, of any deliberate wrongdoing by WWE and the powers that be. And let that sink in. Mind you, I do give you a little bit of my actual real background here, is that I am an investigator. I do investigate cases of abuse and neglect, and sometimes I investigate death of people who are mentally ill. So this is kind of around my wheelhouse. I look for evidence and clues, and when you're doing an investigation, you have to make sure that you dot your T's and cross your I's, and that everything makes sense. And based on what was shown to us and what the statements were from the people that were involved, or the people who were closest to this, that the documentary was able to get on camera, there's not enough evidence to have fault by anybody. And this does seem like, from what was presented, an unfortunate accident that may or may not have been prevented. So let's first break down the whole Owen Hart storyline thing. Owen Hart was known in the beginning of his documentary, they say he was a proud man, he loved his family, and he didn't want to do anything to shame his family, which made him very verbal with creative and his character. And at this time, he probably had a little bit of well-deserved creative control, especially after his brother Brett left for WCW, and they re-signed Owen to make sure that Owen didn't jump ship as well. And they probably gave him a good chunk of change and money, which comes with a little bit of leeway, maybe. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know the details and the parameters of his contract because they didn't give us that. Be it as it may, I find it very interesting that the Blue Blazer, which is known as a comedy gimmick, was something that Owen was okay with doing, and that he didn't speak up for. This, he sounds like he has the stubbornness of a heart, kind of like Brett. And he didn't speak up for himself. He didn't want to do this comedy gimmick. I get the fear of maybe losing your spot, but he's a heart. He's a royal rest. He's part of one of the royal families of wrestling. You have your Harts, your Flairs, your Von Erichs, the McMahons. Those are pretty much your big four, right there. And so I find it weird that all of a sudden he didn't speak up, and all of a sudden with Day Hub he's shaky and uneasy, especially for a spot that he's done before. Speaking of which, the dress rehearsal, according to what was documented and what his wife Martha said, and I guess from whatever information she gathered, Owen was refusing to practice this entrance, saying no, I'm okay, I'm good, I got this. And then he was also told that this is a different setup than before. And that's where it kind of ends. You don't know if he ever practiced it or not. So it leads me to believe, based on the style in which this was presented, that Owen Hart never practiced this. And that's, red flag number one. Whether or not they should have gone on with the stunt, if it wasn't practice, is not a decision that we were privy to, or what the thought process was. Obviously the stunt went on, but we don't know what was communicated after that dress rehearsal, on who was around, and also if we ever did practice it, and how the practice was. And so let's move to the setup. From what Martha showed us, Martha Owens, she showed us a carabiner that apparently was a carabiner that was used when he was descending, and the carabiner was different, hence the different setup. And this one, she said, was one that is used. I'm not an expert in for like flags and sailboats and stuff, and not to have a person. There's like a 6-pound pressure release strap, and it was holding up somebody who was well over 6 pounds. And then also Owen was told that there was also an upper release, so if anything happened, as long as he didn't pull this like other trigger, then he would be fine. And also, here's the thing, we don't know if Owen actually pulled that. I don't know if you can even find it on footage. So there's a hole right there. Did Owen pull a ring that did a release on its own? We don't know. She doesn't give us that much information, which is a big problem with this, is that we don't have enough information to make a clear and accurate decision. It gives you just enough to be upset and feel bad for Owen and the Hart family, and to hate WWE. It's kind of almost like a smear campaign when you really delve into it. But let's talk about the rigs and also the riggers. Martha goes on to state pretty early in the thing that WWE has or she was under the impression, or that WWE has hired, pretty expert riggers from LA and from Hollywood, and people who have done this over and over again. And then that's in one breath. But then really alarmingly, and not so soon after, in the next breath, she says, "Oh, these people weren't experts at all. They were poor. They were trained. They shouldn't have been in charge of this at all." But what evidence do you have of that? You're just making claims. And I don't know if she's an expert in carabiner. I don't know if she has a doctorate. I don't believe she has a doctorate in carabiner stuff. So where's her proof that they weren't experts? She doesn't show it. She doesn't show it at all. And I think that's an issue. That's a huge, huge issue. So there's a lot of holes. The fact that number one, Owen's dead and he can't speak for himself, one issue. The fact that Owen, according to her, Owen was reluctant to practice the stunt, never a huge issue. And we never know if it was practiced or not. We have an issue on the credibility of one Martha herself, but also the credibility of the riggers, which we never really delve into. We're just told they're not experts, they're not experts, they're not experts. What that means, we don't know. We don't know if Owen pulled the release or if the thing kind of just broke on its own. Because apparently Martha has it and it didn't seem to break on her own. It's not broken. It does not seem faulty whatsoever. This carabiner. I hope I'm saying that right. And then one of my last things is, well, two things here is the whole Martha going saying I'm going to seek vengeance. Your day of reckoning is coming, which actually sounds like a wrestling promo. Anywho, I can't blame her for doing what she's doing because obviously this is trauma, and you know my degrees in psychology and in counseling and stuff like that. You know, this is trauma. Your brain, you need to fill the gaps. Your brain is always looking to fill the gaps with a lot of stuff. So if there's something that's not there and that's not evident and clear, your brain still is going to try to find a way to fill the gap. And what she's doing is clearly she's traumatized, she's stressed, she's angry, and she's going through the stages of grief. You know, depression, anger, um, bargaining, denial, acceptance. They don't always go in order, so please don't be like, oh, you got it wrong. No, they don't always go in order. Everybody goes through the stages of grief at different times. Obviously, at this point, she's angry. And by the way, she's still angry because she hasn't accepted what she was given and the evidence that she found, or the evidence that she says she found, because we don't know what happened. We don't know, well, not we don't know what happened, we don't know what evidence she found. She just gives a lot of these vague statements, and we don't know, there's no clarity on any of this stuff. So she's looking for these answers. She goes to trial and she clearly says in the documentary, hey, I wanted this to go to trial. I wanted to see this thing all the way through. But then in the next breath, we find out that it didn't go to trial and that she took an $18 million settlement. And that really irked me. Because if you're the seeker of the truth and you're gonna challenge the authority and you're gonna, you know, fight this thing till the end, and then you stop and took the money, I really question the credibility of what you just said. Were you really in it to seek vengeance, or were you there just to get a shit ton of money for someone that you may wholeheartedly believe is a complete and total accident and that no one is directly at fault? Also, something to consider, and this is probably going to be the most controversial thing that you'll ever hear me say, maybe some of the fault, and you know, minimally some of the fault, maybe some of the fault is on Owen. Based on what was presented, Owen refused to do it. Owen wasn't verbal about his concerns. He just said, no, 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 I'm good. I got this. I got this. He refused to practice it. He wasn't verbal about some of his concerns. And from what I have understood about wrestling and listening to documentaries, you know, the more vocal you are, probably the better. You sometimes have to buck the system, but you have to speak up for yourself. And if you don't speak up yourself, you become a part of the problem. And part of this problem was, and part of his tragedy is, Owen didn't speak up for himself. And now he's dead. So, yeah, you always have to consider that. And that's something that probably Martha doesn't want to actually admit, that potentially Owen's part of the reason he died. A choice he made or choices he made is probably the reason that he passed away. Again, this is all based on what I watched. And I've only watched it once. Some of my questions could be answered once I watch it again, or if I ever watch it again, because I didn't really enjoy that episode on more so than than the other episodes. But yes, you have to realize, if you're really thinking about this, that maybe part of the blame is on Owen. That's a tough pill to swallow, because we're idolizing, we're putting Owen on a pedestal because he was someone who was young and was gone too soon. But people are sometimes responsible for their own deaths and demise. Happens all the time in life. You really, really have to accept that. That sometimes that person's the reason that they're dead. drinking and driving. Suicide is obviously, it's kind of a cop-out, but still, there are multiple reasons and multiple possibilities as to why this went wrong, and if or not it should have been performed in the first place. So I have the $18 million thing and the settlement stuff really, really irked me, because it really kind of made me question, what is she really in this for? And then she goes on to say that she will never allow Owen Hart, the wrestler, to be acknowledged in any wrestling Hall of Fame. And she goes on to claim that her foundation that she created, called the Owen Hart Foundation, is what his legacy should be about, because look at all the people that he has helped, even though he's dead. Look at all the people that the foundation that in his name has done. That's his real legacy. I completely beg to differ. Owen Hart's foundation and Owen Hart himself did not help anybody through the foundation. Owen Hart is dead. You help those people because you run the foundation. Yes, that's you. That's your legacy. Owen Hart's legacy, and what everybody remembers Owen Hart for, the reason that he's famous, the reason that, we're even having a documentary about him, is that he was a wrestler, and he was a damn good wrestler. He was a Hart. His legacy is in the ring. His life's work is in the ring. He wrestled to put food on his table for his family, for his wife, and his kids. And you're not allowing other people to celebrate him probably the way he wanted to be celebrated. Wrestling is in his blood. He comes from a wrestling family. It is a absolute disgrace and an atrocity, and a bit petty on Martha, that she will not allow her dead husband to be acknowledged for something that he did really, really well. That's like saying, I don't want to take, let's take, who died post? It's like saying, I'm trying to think of, like, a good sports figure that died away. It's like Derek Jeter, all of a sudden getting murdered and him never going into the Hall of Fame. It's like Mariano Rivera dying too early and his stats at the time never going into the Hall of Fame just because he died. And that's not who he really was. Yes, to you, he was more than just a wrestler, but to a lot of people in the world, he's a wrestler. He's a damn good wrestler. And he's known for two things: his in-ring ability and the fact that he died pretty early. That's comes the fact. And I feel like, and I hate to, be a little nervous here, but I feel like Martha's having a hard time admitting that WWE isn't completely at fault. And also that some of the fault maybe lies on her husband for his own death. It's a strong possibility based on what was presented, because a lot of it was skewed. I understand being upset at WWE, but you have to, at some point, accept the fact that this is more than likely an accident. Tragedy, of course, but an accident nonetheless that may or may not have been avoided if some factors were at play, and one of those factors being her and husband's inability to speak up when the time came for it. I understand I've just pissed off a ton of you, and it is what it is. It did what it did, but I want to hear your guys' thoughts. Let me know what you guys think about my viewpoint on it. Let me guys know what you think of Dark Side of the Ring. Obviously, thank you guys for being a part of this Patreon experience and this episode of Watch the Throne. Be sure to buy some of this merch. Like, hey, look at all this great King Rickie Rozay merch, and all the other merchandise we have on store. Let your friends know about our Patreon, and all the cool things, like, share, subscribe, and if you want to slap me in the face, I dare you. Come at it. Come at me, bro. Let's go. Let's do it. Anywho, until next time, folks, I will see you soon.
Behold the King of Kings. On your knees, dog.